What's up, guys? It's me, Braden Cole with Eat Sleep Game Productions, and today I'm going to try and break down the Wii U specifications for you. If you take the Wii U and the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 specifications and you put them into computer terms, it's all relatively the same thing. There's always something that's based on something. So today we're going to look at that. But the first thing I like to do before I explain this to you guys is I'd like to share my thoughts on why I think it's stupid to compare the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3 to the Wii U, because inevitably the Wii U is going to be better in all aspects, simply because it's newer hardware, newer technology, it's 7 years older, okay, and the specifications that are shown on the Wii U are already outperforming miles and light years and miles ahead of the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. But just to prove to you that I'm not a bullshitter, and I'm not somebody who's just going out of my way to say this, and I'm not some Nintendo fanboy that's trying to stick up for their company, I'm going to show you why the Wii U is going to have way better specifications, and hopefully put this giant to sleep. I have a website. It's called hwcompare.com, and basically what it does is it lets you compare graphics cards, any graphics card basically ever made, to another graphics card by any company and basically anything at all. So we're going to go ahead and select the Wii U's supposed graphics card, the GeForce 4850, and it has been said by multiple people that the ATI card in the Wii U is going to be based on the Radeon HD 4850 architecture. And just for the sake of the video, we're going to go ahead and select the lowest form of a 4850, the 512 megabyte. We're going to compare it to the PlayStation 3's GeForce 7600 equivalent. And something that's really funny about this website is it won't go no lower than the GeForce 8300. So to give the PlayStation 3 some bump credit, we're going to go ahead and select the highest end GeForce 8600 that we can find, and it would be the 1GB DDR3 version. Now remember, this is a whole nother generation, a whole nother architecture of a card. This is a way higher end card than the PlayStation 3 card. It's a 7600, this is a 8600. So we're going to use the Wii U's the lowest card that could possibly be in the Wii U against something that's way better than the PlayStation 3 graphics. We're going to go ahead and click compare. And what you're seeing here is the power consumption, which is how much power the graphics card draws. A GeForce 8600 GT, which is, remember, higher than the PlayStation 3 specifications, only draws 47 watts, while the Radeon HD 4850 512 megabyte draws 110 watts. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. Just because it draws more power does not mean it's better. Now the memory bandwidth, that's how much memory it has, how much it can transfer, how good the memory basically is, in layman's terms. Radeon HD 4850 512 can handle 63,552 megabytes a second, while the GeForce 8600, once again, that is a higher graphics card than the PlayStation 3, can only handle 22,400 megabytes per second. If you're actually looking at the GeForce 7600, then it's going to be significantly lower than this number. The textile rate, which means how many textures it can show on screen, and basically just how good the textures look and stuff like that. It also has a lot to do with how polished the graphics look like with anti-aliasing and anisotropic filtering. It's how well that can handle it. The Radeon HD 4850 512 can handle 25,000 megapixels a second, while the GeForce 8600 GT can only handle 8,640. Sorry guys, I don't got my glasses on. And then the pixel rate, which is how many pixels it could show on screen at a time, which has a lot to do with your resolution. Like, there's a big gap between 480p and 1080p with the pixel rate, and the higher the pixel rate, the better resolutions you can handle without any performance drop. The Radeon HD 4850 can handle 10,000 megapixels a second. I'm very sorry, guys. And the GeForce 8600 GT can only handle 4,320 megapixels a second. So, since we're looking at a higher end PlayStation 3 card against the lower end Radeon HD 4850, the lower end, unless you're talking about the mobility Radeon, which still would be blowing this card and the PlayStation 3's graphics out of the water. The Wii U equivalent graphics card is basically dominating what the PlayStation 3 has to offer. I don't even want to get into the Xbox 360 because the Xbox 360's graphics card is not even as good as the PlayStation 3's graphics card. So there's no real point in debating that. If the PlayStation 3's isn't as good, then the Xbox 360's is not going to be as good. Now, another thing about the Wii U and the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 is this. The processors in the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, the Xbox 360's Xenos chip, and the PlayStation 3's Cell processor, they are in some form out of date to today's standards. While the Xbox 360 uses a triple core, the PlayStation 3 uses a 8-core. But the 8-core processor inside of the PlayStation 3 is not a real 8-core processor. It's cells. And 2 of those cores are dedicated to the operating system and some other stuff like that, while the other 6 cores are dedicated to gameplay and stuff like that. But once again, they're not true cores. They're mini cores. They're emulated cores. The Wii U is going to use a Power 7 based processor, which is a quad-core clocked at 3 GHz. For those of you that know anything about PC specs and computer gaming today's standards, that is the standard processor you need to play games on a computer, a quad-core. And some of the games haven't even truly figured out how to perfect the quad-core usage. There's rumors that the Xbox 720 is going to use a hex-core processor, which is somewhat overkill at this point because they've barely perfected quad-core, but that's another story for another video for another time. So the Wii U is not fucking around with the processor. They are getting a very high-end, very well-made processor. It handles L1, L2, and L3 cache, while the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 can only handle up to L2 cache. And that's the Xbox 360's, I know for sure, it's a certain megabytes for the whole processor, and then the Wii U will be 4 megabytes per core, so 4 megabytes on their L3 cache times 4. And if you don't know what L3 cache is basically an optimization that writes itself to the processor that keeps track of what you do, so it can keep certain things in the memory in the processor, so when you do it often, it can load it up very fast. In layman's terms, it would mean, let me try to compare it to something here. Let's say you had a favorite TV channel. Well, if you set it to default when you turned on your TV to click over to that channel, that's similar to the processor, the L3 cache, the L2 cache, and the L1 cache. It remembers what you do. Let's say you're on a computer and you constantly are getting on YouTube and you're constantly playing Battlefield. Well, your processor is going to remember that, and L3 cache is a better form of that. Plus it has L1 and L2 and L3 cache, while the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3 only have L1 and L2. And that brings me to the memory. The Wii U speculated to have 786 to 1 GB of RAM, while the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 only had 512 megabytes of RAM. I stated in a previous video that it only had 256, and I apologize for that. That's what I thought it had until I looked it up, and I'm like, ooh. So, even if the Wii U had 512 megabytes of RAM, like its so-called competition, it would still blow that RAM and the competition out of the water, simply because it's going to be cheaper for them to buy newly manufactured, newly architectured RAM because it's mass-produced. And as RAM ages, it gains a little bit of a price simply because it's harder to find. For instance, I went to Radio Shack when I had a DDR2 motherboard that had support for a DDR2 socket RAM. And what happened was, I went to Radio Shack and I ended up paying $40 for a gigabyte of RAM. Well, when I just built my custom hex core computer, with a DDR3 motherboard support for RAM. It cost me $44 for 8 gigabytes of crucial DDR3 RAM. Now that's 8 gigabytes versus 1 gigabyte, okay? There is a huge difference there. And it's a price difference simply because I believe it's easier to make, I might be wrong, and it's mass produced more. So, if you take the Wii U and the Wii U and the thing that I just said and you compare them, the Wii U's 512 megabytes, which it's expected to have more than that, I need you to remember that, but even if it did have 512 megabytes of RAM, the RAM would outperform and have a better architecture and be better optimized than the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 RAM. Therefore, it would perform better. Even if the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 had 2 gigs of RAM, that does not necessarily mean it would be better than the Wii U's 512 gigabytes of RAM, which, once again, it doesn't have that. It's probably going to have more. Because it's newer technology. And every time something newer is made, it's been perfected more. For example, if you guys remember the old Pentium D processors, which is a dual core. It's the first generation of dual core, Intel's first generation of dual core. And you compare it to the Core i3, which is a dual core, and it's the newest type of dual core. Well, you could have a 20 gigahertz, you could have that thing overclocked to 20 gigahertz, which is pretty much impossible with water cooling and all kinds of stuff. And it's still not going to be as good as a 1.6 gigahertz Core i3 processor. You can overclock and overclock and overclock and overclock all you want, but it's not going to be better. It's not going to be better. Simply because they perfected any flaws that the first and the second generations of dual cores have had. The Core 2 Duo, which is a fairly new dual core processor, is still not as good as the Core i3, even though they're pretty much the same thing. A dual core processor. The Core i3 is going to outshine it over 50% more, simply because it's a newer technology. If I'm confusing anybody, I apologize. For those of you that are more tech savvy, you'll understand what I'm saying. So basically, overall, what I'm saying is, it would be harder for Nintendo to create a console with lower specifications than the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, simply because it would cost them too much, not only money-wise, but in the long run, it would cost them too much, which is partially why it would cost them more money-wise. And also, it would be stupid of them, because they can get a GeForce 8300 for cheap as dirt, and it's going to be better than the 7600 and the 1600, the Radeon FX 1600. I mean, it's still going to be as cheap as dirt, so why wouldn't they, you know what I mean? But they're using the 4850, which is light years ahead of anything that the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox can do. And if you're sitting there saying to yourself, well, my friend told me that the PS3's full power isn't even unlocked, and there's no way that a Nintendo console is going to be better. I need you guys to remember that Nintendo was always the more powerful console just up until this generation. And the Master System and the Nintendo NES. The NES was the only other console that was less powerful than its competition. The Super Nintendo was more powerful than the Sega Genesis. The Nintendo 64 was more powerful than the PlayStation 1. The GameCube was more powerful than the PlayStation 2. And this is like the second time that they've been, the Wii and the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, that's the second time. And people seem to forget that. So I need you guys to remember that, and I need you guys to remember that Nintendo is not a stupid company. They really know what they're doing, and you know what? I think that they're going to succeed very, very, very hard with this idea, because it's just a great idea. Thank you guys for checking this out. If you guys would like to subscribe, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask me, and you guys rock. Thanks for watching.